The winter of 1603 had descended upon England like a shroud, casting a somber mood over the palace where Queen Elizabeth I lay motionless on her bed. It was as if the very chill of the season had seeped into her bones, weakening her resolve and sapping her strength. For weeks, the usually vibrant and fiery queen had been eerily silent, refusing to even lie down, as if defying the frailty that had begun to consume her. Her once commanding voice had been reduced to a mere whisper, a faint echo of the powerful tones that had once commanded the attention of her courtiers and subjects alike. As the days turned into weeks, speculation began to swirl among the palace staff and advisors about the cause of her decline. Some pointed to her advanced age, 69 years old and still bearing the weight of a lifelong reign. The strain of decades of rule, with all its attendant pressures and responsibilities, seemed to have finally taken its toll. Others whispered of a possible infection, a fever or untreated illness that had taken hold in her final weeks. The Queen's condition had been deteriorating steadily, with bouts of weakness and exhaustion that left her unable to attend to even the most basic of royal duties. The loss of several close advisors had also taken its toll on Elizabeth's emotional well-being. Their passing had left her feeling isolated and melancholy, a stark contrast to the confident and assertive leader she had once been. There were also concerns about her appetite, or rather, the lack thereof. For days, she had refused to eat or drink properly, a worrying sign that only added to the growing unease among her medical attendants. In an era where the understanding of medicine was still in its infancy, the options for effective treatment were severely limited, leaving Elizabeth's condition to unfold with little hope of intervention. The weight of ruling without an heir had been a lifelong burden for Elizabeth, one that had driven her to make decisions that would secure the future of her kingdom, but at a great personal cost. The pressure of this responsibility had been a constant companion, one that had undoubtedly contributed to her physical and emotional decline. And then, of course, there were the environmental factors, the cold winters, poor heating, and physical strain of maintaining a grueling pace, even in her later years. As the courtiers and doctors quietly recorded their observations, a picture began to emerge of a woman who, despite her formidable strength and resilience, had finally succumbed to the frailties of age and illness. Yet, even in her final days, Elizabeth remained a figure of immense power and presence, a testament to the enduring legacy of a monarch who had ruled England with wisdom and courage for over 4 decades. As the nation teetered on the brink of a new era, one thing was certain: her passing would mark the end of an age and the quiet beginning of a new chapter in England's story. He lingered at the foot of the canopy, his hand resting lightly on the polished oak rail, as if the very wood might convey some hidden strength to the ailing monarch. The physicians, their faces drawn and weary, whispered among themselves, their Latin prayers barely audible over the crackle of the hearth. Lady Catherine, the Queen's most trusted confidant, brushed a stray lock of silver hair from her brow and pressed a cool cloth to Elizabeth's forehead, her eyes never leaving the pale skin that had once commanded nations. Outside, the city of London thrummed with a restless energy. Merchants hurried through the narrow streets, their carts laden with spices and cloth, while the clatter of horse hooves echoed against the cobblestones. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed the Queen's spirit lingered in the tapestries that draped the great chambers. Others whispered that a hidden heir might yet emerge from the shadows. In the taverns, the common folk raised their tankards in solemn toast, half in reverence, half in anticipation of the unknown future. Within the palace walls, the council convened in the privy chamber, the heavy doors shut against the chill. Sir William Cecil, the Queen's steadfast chief minister, rose slowly, his joints protesting the weight of his years. "Your Majesty's health wanes," he said, his voice a measured cadence that carried both respect and urgency. "We must consider the succession, lest the realm be torn asunder by discord." Essex's jaw tightened. He had long coveted a place at the helm of England's destiny. His daring exploits in Ireland and his charismatic presence at court earning him both admirers and enemies. Yet now, with the Queen's breath growing shallow, the delicate balance of power teetered on a razor's edge. He glanced toward the window, where the winter sun cast a thin, amber glow over the Thames, and felt the weight of history pressing upon his shoulders. A soft rustle announced the arrival of Sir Robert Cecil, the younger brother of the chief minister, his eyes sharp as a hawk's. "My lord," he began, "the Scottish King, James VI, has sent word of his willingness to assume the English crown, uniting the two realms under a single sovereign. His claim is strong, his lineage unblemished, and his supporters are already gathering in the north." A murmur rippled through the assembled men. The notion of a Scottish monarch ruling England was both unsettling and, for some, a relief, a chance to avoid the bloodshed that a contested English succession might provoke. Yet for Essex, the prospect of James's accession threatened to eclipse his own ambitions. He felt a sudden, fierce resolve rise within him, a fire that mirrored the Queen's own indomitable spirit. "Your Majesty's legacy must not be diminished by foreign hands," he declared, his voice resonating through the vaulted ceiling. "We have within our own borders men of blood and loyalty who can carry forward the Tudor mantle. Let us not surrender our sovereignty without a fight." Cecil's eyes narrowed. "You speak of rebellion, Earl, yet the Queen's will is waning. She has never named an heir, and the realm looks to stability. James offers a seamless transition, a union that could bring peace after years of strife." The Queen's attendants, sensing the rising tension, fell silent. Lady Catherine stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "Your Majesty has always placed the kingdom above herself. If she were to speak now, she would counsel prudence. Let us honor her memory by ensuring England does not descend into chaos." A sudden gasp cut through the room as a servant entered, breathless, clutching a small lacquered box. "My lady," he whispered, "the Queen has taken her last breath." The words hung in the air like a cold wind, and the candlelight flickered, casting elongated shadows across the stone walls. The council fell into a stunned hush, each man grappling with the enormity of the moment. The queen's eyes, once bright with fire, were now closed forever, her crown resting lightly upon her brow as if awaiting a new bearer. In the days that followed, the palace became a theater of mourning and maneuvering. The black drapes that hung from the great windows swayed gently in the wind, and the mourners' wails echoed through the corridors. Essex, now stripped of the veneer of deference, moved with purpose, rallying his supporters among the younger courtiers and the soldiers stationed at the Tower. He sent missives to the northern lords, invoking the memory of Elizabeth's victories and urging them to stand against a foreign king. Meanwhile, Sir William Cecil, ever the pragmatist, dispatched envoys to James VI, negotiating terms that would preserve English law and the Protestant faith. He convened a secret meeting with the Archbishop of Canterbury, ensuring that the Church's hierarchy would remain intact under any new sovereign. The delicate dance of diplomacy unfolded in hushed chambers, each word weighed against the potential for civil war. As winter deepened, a council of nobles gathered in the Hall of State to deliberate the succession. The great oak doors creaked open, admitting a procession of lords, earls, and bishops, their cloaks heavy with fur. At the head of the assembly stood the aging Sir William, his voice steady despite the tremor of age. "We stand at a crossroads," he proclaimed. "Our queen has departed, leaving a void that must be filled with wisdom, not ambition. The realm's stability depends upon our collective judgment." Essex rose, his posture regal, his eyes blazing. "My lord, I have served this crown with loyalty and vigor. I ask not for the throne, but for the counsel of the Queen's most trusted servant, to guide the nation through this transition. Let us honor Elizabeth by choosing a successor who embodies her spirit, courage, intellect, and a steadfast devotion to England." A murmur rose, half reverent, half skeptical. The younger lords, inspired by Essex's charisma, nodded in agreement, while the older, more cautious peers exchanged glances, recalling the perils of past rebellions. The archbishop stepped forward, his robes rustling softly. "The divine will is not for us to claim," he intoned. "Yet we must ensure that the chosen sovereign upholds the true faith and the peace of our people." When the council adjourned, the decision was not yet sealed. In the quiet of the night, Essex slipped away from the great hall, his mind a tempest of strategy. He made his way to the Tower, where his loyal captain, Sir John Grey, awaited with a contingent of seasoned soldiers. "We must act before James's envoys arrive," Essex whispered, his breath forming a mist in the cold air. "If we can secure the Queen's private chambers and the royal seal, we may present a claim that cannot be ignored." Sir John nodded, his eyes reflecting both resolve and caution. "The Queen's will is unknown, my lord. Yet if we move swiftly, we may sway the council before they are bound by foreign promises." The following dawn, As the first pale light filtered through the stained glass, a courier bearing James's seal arrived at Whitehall. The message, elegantly penned, offered James's acceptance of the English crown, pledging to uphold the laws and the Protestant faith, and proposing a marriage alliance that would unite the two houses. The parchment was placed upon the council's table, its ink still fresh. Essex, standing at the far end of the room, felt a surge of anger and desperation. He seized the Queen's personal diary, hidden beneath her bed, and began to read aloud passages that revealed Elizabeth's private musings on the future of England, her desire for a ruler who would protect the realm's independence, her wariness of foreign influence, and a cryptic note about a faithful son of England who might rise in her stead. The council fell silent, the weight of the Queen's words pressing upon them like a tangible presence. Sir William Cecil, his face lined with fatigue, closed the diary gently. "If this is the Queen's true counsel," he said softly, "then we must honor it above all else." A decision born of grief, ambition, and reverence began to coalesce. The council resolved to convene a parliament in the weeks to come, where the matter of succession would be debated openly, allowing the voice of the nation to be heard. Essex, though his hopes of immediate power were tempered, found a new purpose: to ensure that the Queen's legacy would be preserved, that England would emerge from this dark interlude with its sovereignty intact. In the weeks that followed, the nation held its breath. The streets of London filled with mourners draped in black, yet also with whispers of hope. The distant hills of Scotland sent envoys bearing gifts, while the English lords gathered in the great hall, their banners fluttering in the cold wind. As the Parliament convened, the Queen's portrait, solemn and regal, presided over the proceedings, a silent reminder that the throne was not merely a seat of power, but a mantle of responsibility. When the final vote was cast, it was a compromise that reflected both the Queen's wishes and the pragmatic need for stability. James VI of Scotland would ascend as James I of England, but only after swearing an oath to uphold the English Parliament's authority, to maintain the Protestant faith, and to honor the memory of Elizabeth by preserving the institutions she had fortified. Essex, though humbled, accepted the outcome, his ambition redirected toward serving the new monarch with the same fervor he had once reserved for his queen. Thus, as the first snow of the new year fell upon the rooftops of London, a new chapter began. The shroud that had once cloaked the kingdom lifted, replaced by a tentative light that promised both continuity and change. The echo of Elizabeth's whispered voice lingered in the corridors, a reminder that even in death, a ruler's influence can shape the destiny of a nation. In the weeks that followed the coronation, the kingdom settled into a tentative rhythm, each day a careful negotiation between old loyalties and new expectations. James I, newly crowned, spent long hours in the Privy Council chamber, his mind a tapestry of Scottish customs and English statutes. He listened intently as Sir William Cecil outlined the pressing matters of the realm: the lingering threat of Catholic conspiracies, the restless border with Scotland, and the delicate balance of trade with the burgeoning Dutch Republic. Essex, now appointed Lord Chamberlain, found his influence reshaped rather than diminished. He moved through the palace corridors with a measured step, his eyes ever watchful for whispers that might betray the fragile peace. One evening, as the frost clung to the windows of Whitehall, a messenger slipped a sealed note into his hand. The parchment bore the faint imprint of a rose, the emblem of a secret society that had long operated in the shadows of the court. Its contents were brief but chilling, a plot to resurrect the claim of a faithful son of England, a boy rumored to be the hidden offspring of Elizabeth herself, raised in obscurity to protect the crown from foreign hands. The notion of such a child had been dismissed as legend, a comforting myth for those who feared the loss of a native line. Yet the ink on the note was fresh, and the urgency in its words could not be ignored. Essex convened a discreet meeting with a handful of trusted allies: Cecil, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and Lady Anne, a noblewoman whose family had served the Queen faithfully for generations. In the dim glow of a candlelit study, they weighed the implications. To pursue the rumor could plunge the nation into civil strife. To ignore it might allow a dangerous faction to gain momentum. James, informed of the council's deliberations, summoned Essex to his private chambers. The king's expression was solemn, his fingers tracing the gilt edge of his new crown. "You have served my mother's memory well," he said, "and now you must serve mine. If there is truth to this tale, we must decide whether to expose it and risk chaos, or to conceal it and preserve the stability we have fought so hard to achieve." Essex bowed his head, feeling the weight of centuries upon his shoulders. "Your Majesty, the safety of the realm must guide our hand. Should we investigate discreetly, confirm the existence of this child, and then determine a course that safeguards both the crown and the people?" James nodded, his gaze drifting to the portrait of Elizabeth that still hung above the fireplace. "We shall send a trusted envoy to the north, to the estate of Lord Whitby, where the rumors say the child was hidden. Let us uncover the truth before it becomes a weapon in the hands of our enemies." Thus began a covert expedition through the rolling hills of Yorkshire. Sir Thomas Grey, a seasoned knight loyal to the crown, led a small retinue to Whitby Hall, a stone manor cloaked in ivy and the lingering scent of peat. The lord of the house, an elderly man with a stoic demeanor, greeted them with a measured courtesy. In the great hall, beneath tapestries depicting battles long past, Grey presented a sealed warrant bearing James's seal, requesting access to the manor's private chambers. Lord Whitby hesitated, his eyes flickering to the portrait of Elizabeth that hung opposite the fireplace. "My lord," he said softly, "the secrets of this house are bound by oaths older than any king. Yet I sense the gravity of your request. If there is a child hidden here, it is for the sake of the realm that I reveal what I know." He led the party down a narrow, spiraling staircase to a vaulted cellar, where a single wooden chest lay beneath a dust-laden tarp. With reverent hands, Grey lifted the lid, revealing a bundle of faded linens and a small, silver locket engraved with the Tudor rose. Inside the locket lay a lock of hair, dark as midnight, and a tiny, weather-worn parchment bearing the name Eleanor in an elegant hand. The revelation sent a ripple through the group. Gray turned to Lord Whitby, his voice low. "Is this the child spoken of in the rumors?" The Lord's eyes filled with a quiet sorrow. "Eleanor was born in the final year of your mother's reign, a daughter of a lady who served in the Queen's privy chamber. The Queen, fearing for the child's safety, ordered her to be hidden, to be raised as a commoner. She lived under the name of a shepherd's daughter, never knowing her true blood. Back in London, the news arrived in a sealed dispatch to the king. James read the report in the solitude of his study, the candlelight casting long shadows on the walls. He felt a surge of conflicting emotions, pity for the innocent child, curiosity about the potential claim, and a pragmatic concern for the stability of his own reign. He called Essex to his side once more. "We have uncovered a living fragment of Elizabeth's lineage," James said, his voice steady. "We must decide whether to bring her into the light, to honor the Queen's hidden wish, or to keep her concealed, preserving the peace we have forged." Essex bowed, his mind already turning to the political ramifications. "Your Majesty, if we reveal Eleanor, we risk emboldening those who would use her as a pawn against you. Yet if we conceal her, we deny the Queen's secret desire for a native heir. Perhaps there is a middle path. Grant her a noble title, protect her from the public eye, and allow her to live quietly, a symbol of Elizabeth's love for England without threatening the crown." James considered this, his gaze lingering on the portrait of his mother, her eyes seeming to flicker with approval. "We shall grant her the title of Lady Eleanor of York, a position of honor yet removed from the line of succession. She shall be educated, protected, and her existence known only to those we trust. In this way, we honor Elizabeth's memory while safeguarding the realm." The decree was issued in secret, and Lady Eleanor was escorted to a secluded manor in the countryside, where she would be raised under the watchful eye of a select few. The kingdom, unaware of the hidden heir, continued its march toward a new era under James' eye, while the echo of Elizabeth's whispered voice found a quiet echo in the heart of a girl who would grow to understand the weight of a crown she would never wear. Mr. Finch's eyes narrowed as he traced the faded ink of the passage, his fingers trembling slightly over the brittle parchment. "Eleanor, this is not merely a legend. The rite I speak of is called the Rose's Vigil, an ancient ceremony that the Tudors performed when a hidden heir was to be acknowledged, though never placed upon the throne. It required the child to journey to the old chapel on the cliffs of Whitby, where a council of the oldest noble houses would lay a single rose upon her brow and whisper the oath of protection. The ceremony was meant to bind the realm's loyalty to the bloodline without upsetting the succession." A chill ran through the candle-lit library, and the shadows seemed to lean closer. Eleanor felt the weight of the locket against her breast, the lock of midnight hair a silent reminder of the Queen's secret. Why would such a right be kept hidden? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. The Queen feared that any overt claim would fracture the peace James has fought to secure, Mr. Finch replied. She entrusted a handful of loyal families, my own ancestors among them, to safeguard the tradition. The knowledge was passed down in whispers, encoded in verses and symbols, until the last of the original custodians died. It appears the manuscript you found is one of the few surviving fragments. Elinor's mind raced. The notion of a pilgrimage, of stepping onto a cliffside where the sea crashed against stone, felt both terrifying and inevitable. She could not remain in the safety of the manor, while a piece of her destiny lay dormant, waiting for a ritual that might never be performed again. If the rite still exists, we must honor it, she said, resolve hardening in her chest. But we cannot act alone. The world beyond these walls is fraught with eyes that would seize any hint of a Tudor heir. At that moment, a soft knock sounded at the heavy oak door. Mrs. Finch entered, her face pale but composed, a sealed envelope clutched in her gloved hand. A messenger from London arrived this morning, she announced, handing the vellum to Elinor. The seal bore the royal coat of arms, the lion and unicorn intertwined, and the ink inside was a hurried scrawl. My Lord James has learned of a disturbance in the north, the letter read. Reports of a band of rebels gathering near Whitby, claiming to act in the name of the true Queen. I command you, Sir Thomas Grey, to investigate and, if necessary, suppress the uprising. Discretion is paramount. The Crown cannot be seen to intervene in matters of local unrest. Elinor's breath caught. Sir Thomas Grey, now a seasoned commander of the King's Guard, had been the very man who had uncovered the chest years before. His name was inked on the same parchment that had set her fate in motion. She turned the letter over, knotting a marginal note in a different hand. For the Lady of York, should you find the path to the Rose's vigil, meet me at the old pier at dusk. Lee. A surge of hope and dread mingled within her. The note could have been a trap, a ploy by those who wished to expose her, yet it also offered a chance to fulfill the ancient rite. She rose from the desk, the locket clinking softly against her throat. We must prepare, she said to the Finches. If the rebels are gathering, they may already be aware of the old chapel. We need a way to reach Whitby unseen, and we need allies we can trust. Mr. Finch nodded, already moving toward a hidden chest beneath the floorboards. He produced a weather-worn map of the Yorkshire coast, its edges frayed, and a set of iron keys that had once opened the secret passages of the manor. These keys belong to the old service tunnels that run beneath the estate and connect to the river. We can use them to slip out under cover of night and board a small fishing vessel that frequents the harbor. It will take us to the cliffs without drawing the king's watchful eyes. That night, as the moon rose high and the manor fell silent, Elinor slipped into the tunnels with Mr. and Mrs. Finch, the locket warm against her skin. The stone walls echoed with the soft drip of water, and the distant roar of the sea grew louder with each step. Emerging at the river bank, they found a lone boat moored to a weather-worn pier, its oars waiting like patient hands. A figure stepped from the shadows, a tall man cloaked in a dark coat, his face partially hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. Sir Thomas Grey, Eleanor breathed, recognizing the scar that ran across his left cheek, a reminder of battles fought for the crown. He inclined his head, his eyes scanning the horizon. Lady Eleanor, the king's orders have placed us both on a collision course with the rebels. Yet the path you seek lies beyond the reach of his soldiers. I will escort you to Whitby, but we must move swiftly. The tide turns at midnight, and the cliffs are treacherous in the dark. The boat slipped silently into the black water, the oars cutting through the stillness. As they glided toward the jagged shoreline, Eleanor felt the weight of history pressing against her, a lineage concealed, a promise whispered across centuries, and a destiny that now beckoned from the edge of the world. The wind carried the salty scent of the sea, and somewhere on the cliffs, a lone rose seemed to wait, its petals poised to fall upon a brow that had never known its own crown. The boat slipped closer to the craggy shore, the cliffs rising like stone teeth against the night sky. A thin veil of mist curled around the base of the rocks, muffling the sound of the oars and turning the world into a muted tableau. Sir Thomas guided the vessel with a steady hand, his eyes never leaving the dark line where sea met land. Eleanor pressed the locket to her chest, feeling its faint pulse as if it were a heart beating in time with the tide. When the hull finally brushed the hidden cove, a narrow path of flagstones emerged from the shadows, worn smooth by centuries of footfalls. The group disembarked in silence, the only sound the distant crash of waves against the cliffs and the soft rustle of sea grass. Mr. Finch led the way, his lantern casting a trembling amber glow that danced across the wet stones. Behind him, Mrs. Finch clutched a satchel heavy with herbs and dried parchment, documents that might prove useful in the days to come. They followed the flagstones up a steep, winding stair that disappeared into the darkness of a cavernous archway. The air grew cooler, scented with brine and the faint perfume of wild roses that seemed to cling to the stone itself. At the end of the passage, a heavy wooden door stood ajar, its iron hinges groaning as a cold draft slipped through. Beyond it lay the ruins of an ancient chapel, its stone walls draped in ivy, and its once proud spire now a broken silhouette against the moon. Inside, the chapel was a hollowed sanctuary of shadows. Moonlight filtered through shattered stained glass windows, painting the floor with shards of violet and amber. In the center of the nave lay a stone altar, its surface etched with a faded sigil, a rose surrounded by a circle of thorns. Eleanor stepped forward, the locket's warmth intensifying, as if the relic recognized the place. She placed her hand upon the altar, and a low hum resonated through the stone, reverberating in her bones. From the darkness at the far end, a figure emerged, cloaked in a tattered mantle. The hood fell back to reveal a man with silvered hair, and eyes the color of storm clouds. He bowed his head in respect. "Earl Aldrich," he whispered, the name reverberating like a prayer. "The keeper of the vigil has returned." Eleanor's breath caught. "You are the one who sent the letter, E." Aldrich lifted a gauntleted hand, revealing a scar that mirrored Sir Thomas, though older and deeper. The letter was a summons, not a trap. The Rose's vigil is more than legend. It is the keystone that binds the kingdom's fate. The king seeks to crush it, fearing the power it holds. You, Lady Eleanor, are the last of the line that can awaken it. Sir Thomas stepped forward, his scar glinting in the moonlight. "And what of the rebels? Are they allies or foes in this right?" Aldrich's gaze shifted to the shadows where Alice stood, her green eyes alight with fierce resolve. "The rebels are the blood that will carry the Rose's seed to new soil. Their cause aligns with the vigil's purpose, to restore balance when the crown has grown too heavy. But the path is treacherous. The king's men have already set traps along the coast, and a traitor walks among us." Eleanor felt the weight of the locket settle deeper, a soft thrum echoing against her ribs. She opened the tiny compartment hidden beneath the clasp and found a folded scrap of vellum, its ink still fresh. The words, written in a hand she recognized as her mother's, read, "When the rose blooms at midnight, the crown shall rise. Trust the one who bears the scar of the dragon, and the veil will lift." A sudden gust rattled the chapel's broken windows, scattering a cascade of rose petals across the stone floor. The petals swirled around Eleanor's feet, forming a delicate circle that glowed faintly with an inner light. She knelt, placing the locket upon the altar, and whispered the ancient oath her ancestors had whispered in hushed tones for generations. "By blood and by rose I claim my right. Let the veil be torn, and the kingdom be set free." The hum from the altar swelled into a resonant chord, and the stone walls trembled. A hidden compartment in the altar's base slid open, revealing a slender, silver key etched with the same rose and thorn sigil. Aldrich reached for it, his fingers brushing Eleanor as he lifted the key. "The key to the hidden vault beneath Whitby," he said, his voice reverent. "Within lies the crown of thorns, the true symbol of the kingdom's promise. With it we can rally the people, expose the king's tyranny, and fulfill the vigil." Eleanor rose, the locket's glow dimming as the rite reached its climax. She turned to Sir Thomas, whose scar now seemed to pulse with a faint ember. "We ride at first light," she declared. "The tide will carry us to the vault, and the rose will guide us." Alice stepped forward, her hand outstretched. "Then let us move, Lady Eleanor. The cliffs will not wait, and the night grows thin. The rose's petals have fallen. Now we must gather the thorns." Together, the small band slipped from the ruined chapel, the silver key clutched tightly in Aldrich's palm. The mist swirled around them as they descended the stone steps, the echo of their footsteps merging with the distant roar of the sea. Above, the lone rose on the clifftop seemed to unfurl its final bloom, shedding a single petal that drifted down like a promise, landing softly on Aliner's shoulder as she vanished into the darkness toward Wit Bai's hidden destiny. The voices grew clearer, low and urgent, drifting on the damp air like the tide itself. "Must secure the entrance before dawn," one muttered, the words muffled by the fog. The key is still missing." Aliner's breath caught. The silver key they carried was the very thing the men feared. Alice slipped a hand into the folds of her cloak, pulling out a thin, curved blade. "We have only minutes," she whispered, eyes flicking toward the silhouette of the ruined church that loomed ahead, its spire a jagged tooth against the night sky. "Take cover behind those stones. I'll draw them away." Aldrich nodded, his scar catching a stray beam of moonlight. He pressed the key into Aliner's palm, the metal warm as if it recognized her blood. "When we're inside, the vault will reveal itself." "Trust the scar, trust the rose," he murmured, recalling the words on the vellum. Aliner crouched low, the locket pressed against her chest, its faint glow pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. She felt the weight of generations settle on her shoulders, but also a fierce certainty that the path ahead, though treacherous, was theirs to claim. Alice slipped forward, her boots silent on the slick stones. She raised her blade, catching the faint glint of a torch held by a sentry perched on the church's outer wall. With a swift, practiced motion, she thrust the blade into the torch's base, sending a burst of flame that sputtered and died, plunging the immediate area into deeper darkness. The sentry's startled shout cut through the mist, and the other men turned, weapons drawn. "And now," Alice hissed, and the band scattered into the shadows of the crumbling nave. Aliner and Aldrich slipped through a broken archway, the stone doorway yawning like a mouth waiting to swallow them whole. Inside, the air was thick with incense long since burned away, and the floor was littered with shattered pews and fallen candles. At the far end of the nave, half concealed by a fallen altar, a stone slab lay flush with the ground. Its surface was etched with the same rose and thorn sigil that adorned the key. Aliner knelt, feeling the coolness of the stone against her palms, and placed the silver key into the shallow groove. The metal sang a soft, resonant note, and the slab shivered, sliding aside to reveal a narrow stairwell spiraling down into blackness. Aldrich led the way, his torch casting trembling shadows on the walls. The stairwell descended deep beneath the church, the sound of the sea above muffled to a distant roar. As they reached the bottom, a vaulted chamber opened before them, its walls lined with ancient stonework and a single pedestal at its center. Upon the pedestal rested a circlet of twisted iron, thorns interwoven with delicate rosebuds of blackened metal, the crown of thorns. Aliner stepped forward, her hand trembling as she lifted the circlet. The moment her fingers brushed the cold metal, a low hum filled the chamber, reverberating through the floor and up the stairs. The hum grew into a chord that seemed to pulse with the very heartbeat of the kingdom. "Someone's coming," Aldrich warned, his voice echoing off the stone. From the stairwell above, the clatter of boots and the harsh shouts of the king's men surged upward. Their torches flared, casting a wavering light that danced across the vaulted ceiling. A figure emerged from the darkness at the far side of the chamber, a man cloaked in the deep blue of the royal guard, his face half hidden beneath a hood. He stepped forward, and the hood fell back to reveal a familiar visage. Sir Thomas, his scar now a dark, smoldering line across his cheek, but his eyes no longer held the steady resolve Eleanor remembered. Instead, they flickered with a calculating gleam. "Eleanor," he said, voice smooth as polished steel, "you have done well to bring the key. But the crown does not belong to rebels or vigilantes. It belongs to the throne, and I have been tasked to retrieve it for the king." Eleanor's grip tightened on the circlet. "You betrayed us, Thomas. The scar was meant to guide us, not to bind us to the king's will." Thomas lifted his hand, revealing a hidden dagger glinting in the torchlight. "The king's men are not the only threat. The traitor you fear walks among you, and I have been sent to ensure the crown does not fall into the hands of those who would tear the realm apart." A sudden crash echoed from the stairwell as Aldrich and Alice burst into the chamber, swords drawn. "We'll see who the true traitor is," Aldrich snarled, lunging at Thomas. The clash of steel rang out, and the circlet slipped from Eleanor's grasp, rolling across the stone floor. In the chaos, a shadow detached itself from the far wall, a figure cloaked in the tattered robes of a monk, the emblem of the vigil stitched into the hem. He raised his hands, chanting in a low, resonant tone. The stone walls trembled, and a fissure opened beneath Thomas's feet, swallowing him into a yawning abyss that seemed to pulse with dark energy. The monk turned to Eleanor, his eyes bright with a fierce, unyielding light. "The veil has been lifted," he said, his voice echoing as if spoken from the very stones. "The crown is yours, Lady of the Rose, but the kingdom's fate now rests on the choices you make." Eleanor knelt once more, this time to retrieve the crown of thorns. She placed it upon her head, feeling the thorns bite into her scalp, each prick a reminder of the sacrifices required. The circlet glowed, and a surge of warmth spread through her veins, intertwining her blood with the ancient magic of the vigil. Outside, the king's men battered at the church doors, their torches sputtering against the stone. Alice and Aldrich fought back, holding the entrance long enough for Eleanor and the monk to slip through a hidden passage that led beneath the cliffs, toward the hidden harbor where the rebel fleet waited. The mist thickened as they emerged onto a narrow ledge overlooking the sea. The first light of dawn tinged the horizon, turning the water to molten gold. In the distance, the rebel ships rose like dark silhouettes against the sunrise, their sails bearing the rose sigil. Eleanor raised the crown of thorns, its thorns catching the first rays of sun, scattering shards of light across the water. "The kingdom will hear our call," she declared, voice steady despite the roar of the surf. "Let the crown be a beacon, not a weapon. Let the rose bloom again, and may the veil never fall again." The rebel fleet surged forward, their oars striking the water in unison, as the tide turned in their favor. The kingdom's future, once shrouded in darkness, now glimmered with the promise of a new dawn. The wind howled louder, and the sea rose in towering swells that threatened to swallow the rebel ships whole. Eleanor felt the crown of thorns pulse against her temples, a steady rhythm that seemed to sync with the thunderheads above. With a fierce cry, she lifted her arms, and the thorns glowed brighter, casting a crimson halo that cut through the darkness. From the heart of the storm, a column of water erupted, forming a towering vortex that spiraled toward the sky. The vortex gathered the rain, the wind, and the very magic that coursed through the crown, shaping it into a blade of pure, crackling energy. Eleanor thrust the blade forward, and the storm obeyed, parting the waves like a curtain. The king's fleet, a line of sleek war galleons bearing the Black Lion of Marek, emerged from the mist, their flags snapping in the gale. Their captains shouted orders, their cannons primed, but the vortex swallowed their fire, turning shot after shot into harmless steam. The rebel oars, now guided by the luminous current, surged forward with renewed vigor, each stroke a heartbeat of defiance. Brother Marcus stood at Eleanor's side, his monk's robes drenched but his eyes alight with purpose. He whispered an ancient chant, his voice weaving through the roar of the storm. The chant resonated with the crown, and the blade of light expanded, forming a radiant arch that stretched across the water, a bridge of pure energy linking the rebel fleet to the distant shore where the king's citadel loomed. Across the water, the citadel's towers flickered as the storm's power reached them. Windows shattered, and the stone walls trembled. Inside, King Marek, a gaunt man with a crown of iron, stared at the horizon, his face a mask of fury and fear. He raised his own scepter, a jagged piece of obsidian that pulsed with dark sorcery, and called upon the hidden legions of the Shadow Guard. From the shadows of the citadel's lower chambers, cloaked figures emerged, their armor black as night, their eyes glowing with a cold, unnatural light. They moved as a single entity, a tide of darkness intent on crushing the rebellion before it could reach the shore. Eleanor sensed the shift. The crown's thorns tightened, not in pain but in warning. She turned to the monk, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We cannot let them breach the bridge. If they cross, the magic will be torn apart, and the realm will fall into endless night." Brother Marcus nodded, his hand moving to the hem of his robe. From within the folds, he produced a small, crystal vial filled with a silvery liquid that shimmered like moonlight. "This is the essence of the veil," he said. "It can bind the darkness, but it must be poured at the heart of the storm." Eleanor raised the crown once more, and the blade of light split into 1,000 shards, each one racing toward the vortex's core. The shards struck the essence, and a brilliant flash erupted, sending a wave of pure, white light cascading outward. The darkness of the Shadow Guard recoiled, their forms dissolving like mist under the morning sun. The king's scepter cracked, splintering into fragments that fell into the sea, swallowed by the very storm it had tried to command. King Marek, his power broken, fell to his knees on the deck of his flagship, his eyes meeting Eleanor across the tumultuous waters. For a heartbeat, silence settled over the battlefield. Then, as if the world itself exhaled, the storm began to subside. The vortex collapsed, the waters calmed, and the radiant bridge faded, leaving behind a tranquil sea that reflected the first true sunrise the kingdom had seen in years. Elinor stepped onto the deck of the lead rebel ship, the crown of thorns now dimmed but still warm against her skin. She extended a hand toward the fallen king, not in triumph but in mercy. "Rise, Marek," she said softly. "The realm has suffered enough. Let us rebuild together, or at least let the dead rest in peace." Marek looked up, his face a map of regret. He reached for her hand, his fingers trembling. "If the crown can heal," he whispered, "perhaps it can also forgive." Brother Marcus placed the empty vial on the deck, its contents spent, and turned his gaze to the horizon where the rebel fleet gathered. The rose sigil sails fluttered gently now, no longer a war banner but a promise of renewal. The crew, exhausted but alive, began to lower their weapons, their eyes reflecting the dawning light. In the distance, the cliffs that had hidden the secret harbor glowed faintly, as if the ancient stones themselves were acknowledging the new covenant. The veil that had once shrouded the kingdom was lifted, not by force, but by the willingness of its people to choose compassion over conquest. Elinor felt the thorns of the crown loosen their grip, the pain receding into a gentle reminder of the price paid. She looked out over the sea, the calm water mirroring the sky, and felt a quiet certainty settle within her. The kingdom would not be perfect, and the scars of war would linger, but the rose could bloom again, nurtured by the very blood that had once threatened to drown it. The rebel fleet turned back toward the hidden harbor, its ships now bearing both the rose and the lion, symbols intertwined on a new banner that fluttered in the gentle breeze. As they sailed, the people of the coastal towns emerged from their homes, eyes wide with wonder, cheering the sight of a united realm returning home. Elinor stood at the prow, the crown of thorns resting lightly upon her brow, and whispered a promise to the wind. "May the veil never fall again, and may the rose forever find its way through the thorns." The sea carried her words far and wide, a lullaby for a kingdom reborn. The first light of morning slipped through the harbor's stone arches, painting the decks in gold. Elinor felt the weight of the crown settle once more, not as a burden, but as a reminder of the promise she had made. She turned to Marek, whose regal bearing had softened, and saw in his eyes a flicker of the king he once was, now tempered by humility. "Your people have suffered long enough," Marek said, his voice low but steady. "Let us begin by tending to the wounds that lie beyond the battlefield." He gestured toward the rows of fishing boats bobbing at the quay, their hulls scarred by the recent storm. Elinor nodded, and together they walked the length of the pier, where the first task awaited, restoring the market that fed the coastal towns. Brother Marcus, ever the chronicler, unfurled a weather-worn map on a wooden crate. The inked lines traced the old trade routes that had once pulsed with life, now choked by blockades and fear. "If we reopen the northern passages," he murmured, "the grain from the highlands can reach the southern farms again." The rose will find nourishment in the soil of cooperation. He traced a path with his finger, and Alina felt the rhythm of the kingdom's heartbeat return beneath her palm. Kale, the rebel leader who had once stood at the edge of the cliff, now stood beside the harbor master, overseeing the unloading of crates filled with fresh produce, tools, and woven cloth. He spoke to the dockworkers in a voice that carried both authority and compassion. "We fought for freedom, but freedom is nothing without the means to live," he declared, and the workers responded with a chorus of assent, their faces brightening as the first sacks of wheat were set down. As the sun climbed higher, a council gathered beneath the ancient stones that guarded the harbor entrance. Around a low table sat Alina, Marek, Brother Marcus, Kale, and a handful of elders from the coastal villages. The air was thick with the scent of salt and pine, and the distant cry of a gull seemed to mark the solemnity of the moment. "We must decide how to share the crown's power," Alina began, her fingers lightly brushing the thorns that still clung to the metal. "It cannot belong to a single ruler again. The crown must become a symbol of collective stewardship, a covenant that binds us all." She looked at Marek, then at Kale, and finally at the elders, whose eyes reflected generations of wisdom. Marek inclined his head. "I will relinquish the throne, not out of defeat, but out of respect for the people who have endured my mistakes. Let the council govern, guided by the crown's purpose, to protect, not to dominate." His words resonated, and a murmur of approval rippled through the gathering. Brother Marcus lifted the empty vial that had once held the essence, holding it aloft. "From this emptiness we shall draw a new well," he intoned. "A well of shared purpose, where each of us may pour our hopes and draw strength." He placed the vial on the table, and a soft, pale light seeped from its cracked surface, spreading like a gentle tide across the council's faces. Kale rose, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, now sheathed. "The lion and the rose shall fly together," he said, pointing to the intertwined banners that fluttered above the harbor. "Let them be the standard of a kingdom that values both courage and compassion." The crowd erupted in cheers, the sound echoing off the cliffs and mingling with the sea's sigh. In the weeks that followed, the harbor transformed. Workshops sprang up where blacksmiths forged tools for rebuilding homes, while healers set up tents to tend to the wounded and the sick. Children who had known only the clang of swords now chased each other along the quay, their laughter a new anthem for the realm. Alina spent her days walking among the people, listening to their stories, and offering counsel where she could. The crown of thorns, now polished and softened, rested on a pedestal in the central hall of the harbor, its thorns no longer sharp but etched with delicate vines that seemed to grow of their own accord. It became a place of pilgrimage, where anyone could place a hand and feel the pulse of the kingdom's renewed heart. One evening, as the sky blushed with the colors of dusk, Alina stood on the prow of the crown of thorns once more, the wind tugging at her hair. Marek approached, his shoulders no longer burdened by a crown, but by the quiet confidence of a man who had found redemption. He placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered, We have lit a fire that will not be easily extinguished. May it guide us through the darkness that still lingers beyond our shores." She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "The rose will always find its way through the thorns," she replied, "as long as we tend it together." The two of them watched as lanterns were lit along the harbor, their soft glow spilling into the water, turning the sea into a field of stars. Beyond the harbor, the cliffs that had hidden the secret passage glimmered with a faint, amber hue. Legends spoke of ancient guardians within those stones, and now, as the kingdom healed, a low hum rose from the rock face, a song of acknowledgement, as if the very land itself was breathing in harmony with its people. The kingdom's rebirth was not instantaneous. Fields would need to be replanted, bridges repaired, and trust rebuilt. Yet each sunrise brought a new promise, each shared meal a testament to unity, and each whispered prayer a reminder that the veil of fear had been lifted. And as the wind carried Eleanor's promise across the waves, it found its way into the hearts of distant villages, stirring hope wherever it touched. In the months that followed, the council convened regularly beneath the ancient stones, their decisions guided by the light that emanated from the empty vial now filled with the collective will of the realm. The lion and the rose flew together on banners that stretched from the highest tower of the capital to the smallest fishing hut, a constant reminder that strength and beauty could coexist. And so, with the crown of thorns transformed into a beacon of shared stewardship, the kingdom set its course toward a future forged by compassion, courage, and the unyielding belief that even the deepest wounds could give rise to the most vibrant blossoms. The hum from the cliffs grew steadier each night, a low vibration that seemed to pulse in time with the lantern's glow. Eleanor felt it in her bones, a reminder that the kingdom's rebirth was tied to something older than any crown or council. One mist-laden dawn, she and Marek gathered a small band of scholars, healers, and a handful of the harbor's most skilled craftsmen. Their purpose was not to repair roofs or forge swords, but to answer the song that rose from the stone. They climbed the winding path that led to the hidden passage, the amber light of the cliffs casting long shadows on the moss-covered steps. At the mouth of the cavern, the vines that had once etched the crown of thorns now curled around the entrance, their leaves shimmering with dew. As the group entered, the air grew cool and fragrant with the scent of earth and ancient pine. The hum transformed into a clear, resonant chord, echoing off the walls and guiding them deeper. Beyond the first chamber lay a vast vaulted hall, its ceiling supported by columns of living stone, each etched with the same delicate vines that adorned the crown. In the center stood a pedestal of crystal, cradling a single, translucent sphere that pulsed with a soft inner light. When Alina reached out, the sphere opened like a blossom, revealing a swirling tapestry of images. Battles long past, the rise of the first kings, and most strikingly, a map of the kingdom overlaid with constellations that matched the night sky above the harbor. Marek traced a line that led from the harbor to a distant archipelago, a place spoken of only in whispered legend, the Isle of the First Dawn. The tapestry's voice, barely audible, spoke of a guardian bound to the crown's original thorns, a keeper of the kingdom's deepest memory. It warned that the harmony they had forged was fragile, for the ancient guardians would awaken fully only when the kingdom faced a trial that required both strength and compassion in equal measure. Returning to the harbor, Elinor called the council together beneath the ancient stones. She described the Hall of Stone, the living map, and the promise of the Isle. The council members listened, their faces illuminated by the flickering torchlight, and felt the weight of the new knowledge settle upon them. It was decided that a delegation would set sail at first light, bearing the crown's softened thorns as a token of goodwill, and the empty vial, now filled with the collective will of the realm, as a beacon to guide them through unknown waters. The ships left the harbor with sails dyed the deep crimson of roses and the golden hue of lions, their hulls painted with the intertwined symbols that now fluttered from every tower and hut. As they slipped past the amber cliffs, the hum rose to a triumphant chorus, and the sea itself seemed to part, revealing a path of luminous foam that led toward the horizon. Elinor stood on the prow of the lead vessel, the wind catching her hair, and felt the pulse of the crown of thorns reverberate through the wood beneath her feet. Days turned into weeks. Storms tested the crew, yet each time the lanterns on deck glowed brighter, as if feeding on the hope of those ashore. When the clouds finally cleared, the silhouette of the Isle of the First Dawn emerged, its cliffs covered in the same amber glow, its beaches strewn with rose-colored sand. At the island's heart rose a towering stone altar, its surface etched with the same vines that now bound the kingdom's destiny. Elinor and Marek stepped onto the altar, placing the softened thorns upon it. The stone trembled, and from its depths rose a figure cloaked in mist, a guardian of the ancient order, eyes like polished amber, voice resonant as the hum that had guided them. "You have healed the wounds of your people," the guardian intoned, "and you have listened to the song of the land. Yet the darkness beyond your shores still gathers, not of swords but of silence, where fear can take root in the hearts of those who have not yet heard your rose." The guardian extended a hand, and from it fell a single seed, luminous and warm. "Plant this in the soil of every village, in the heart of every market, and let its roots bind your people to the promise you have forged. Let the rose and the thorns grow together, and the darkness will find no place to linger." Elinor cradled the seed, feeling its gentle heat pulse in time with her own heart. She turned to Marek, whose eyes reflected the dawning light of the island. Together they vowed to carry the seed back to the kingdom, to sow it wherever hope was needed, and to let the song of the ancient guardians echo through every corner of their world. The tide turned, and the horizon ahead shimmered with the promise of a future where compassion and courage would forever be intertwined. The seed was placed in a shallow bowl of earth before the gathered crowd, and as Elinor pressed it gently into the soil, a soft golden light unfurled from its core, spreading like sunrise across the square. The light seeped into the cracks of the cobblestones, into the wooden shutters of the houses, and into the hearts of the onlookers. Children laughed, their voices rising in a chorus that seemed to echo the ancient hum, while the elders felt a warmth in their chests that reminded them of forgotten songs. Marek knelt beside the bowl, his hands steady as he whispered the promise the guardian had spoken. "May the rose and the thorns grow together," he said, and the words hung in the air, resonating with the hum that now pulsed through the town like a living heartbeat. The seed sprouted instantly, a delicate shoot of silver green, unfurling a single leaf that shimmered with the same amber glow that had guided them across the sea. Word of the miracle traveled faster than any messenger. Within a day, caravans set out from the capital, bearing the luminous seed in specially crafted satchels lined with the softened thorns for protection. Eleanor and Marek rode at the head of each convoy, their presence a beacon of reassurance. In every village they entered, the seed was planted in the central square, in the market stalls, in the courtyards of the temples. As each seed took root, a network of glowing vines began to weave itself through the kingdom, linking towns and hamlets with a faint, comforting luminescence. The darkness the guardian had warned of did not arrive with swords or fire. It crept in as a quiet apathy, a lingering doubt that settled in the minds of those who had known only hardship. In the northern highlands, where the wind howls through barren crags, the first signs appeared. A village that had once thrived now fell silent, its people withdrawing into their homes, eyes dimmed by fear of the unknown. Eleanor received a messenger bearing a single, wilted rose, a symbol of the kingdom's distress. She and Marek rode northward, the path winding through mist-cloaked valleys. When they arrived, they found the villagers gathered around a withered altar, its stone surface cracked, the vines that once adorned it now brittle and brown. The seed they had planted there glowed faintly, its light struggling against a thick, oppressive fog that seemed to swallow sound. Eleanor knelt, placing her palm upon the soil, and felt the faint tremor of the hum beneath the fog's weight. "Listen," she whispered, "to the song that still lives within you." She closed her eyes, allowing the hum to rise through her veins, and began to sing the ancient melody the guardians had taught her on the isle, a simple refrain of rising and falling, of light meeting shadow. Marek joined, his voice low and steady, and together their song wove through the fog, threading the melody into the very air. The fog quivered, then receded like a tide pulling back from the shore. The vines on the altar brightened, their leaves unfurling anew, and the seed's glow surged, casting a warm amber across the faces of the villagers. Hope once dimmed flared once more. The people stepped forward, hands reaching for one another, sharing stories of the rose and the thorns, of the journey across the sea, and of the guardian's promise. Their laughter returned, and with it the hum grew louder, a chorus that resonated from the highest peak to the deepest valley. News of the reclaimed village spread, and the kingdom's network of luminous vines pulsed stronger with each new planting. Yet the darkness was not vanquished. It lingered at the edges in places where fear still whispered, among the outcasts, the wanderers, the ones who had never felt the crown's protection. Eleanor understood that the seed's power was not a single act, but an ongoing stewardship. She called upon the council to establish guardians of the seed, a fellowship of volunteers tasked with traveling to the farthest reaches, tending the vines, and teaching the song that bound them. The first of these guardians, a young healer named Leora, set out with a satchel of seedlings and a heart full of resolve. She trekked through the desert dunes of the southern sands, where the sun baked the earth and the wind sang a lonely hymn. In the oasis town of Muraj, the people had grown weary, their wells drying, their spirits cracked. Leora knelt beside the central well, placed a seed into the sand, and sang the ancient melody. The ground trembled, and a new spring burst forth, its water sparkling with the same amber hue that had guided Eleanor's ships. The villagers rejoiced, their faces alight with the reflected glow, and the hum rose once more, weaving their gratitude into the kingdom's ever-growing song. As seasons turned, the kingdom transformed. Roads once shadowed by doubt now glimmered with threads of light. Markets buzzed with stories of distant lands where the seed had taken root. Children grew up hearing the hum as a lullaby, learning early that compassion and courage were twin vines that could not be torn apart. Eleanor, now older but still fierce in purpose, stood on the balcony of the palace, watching the sunrise paint the horizon in rose and gold. The crown of thorns rested beside her, its softened edges a reminder of the journey from pain to healing. In the distance, beyond the amber cliffs, a faint ripple moved across the sea, an echo of the hum returning to the waters that had once guided them. It was a reminder that the world beyond their shores still held mysteries, and that the seed's promise was not confined to a single kingdom. With the rose and the thorns intertwined, Eleanor felt the pulse of the ancient guardian steady within her, a rhythm that would carry her people forward, wherever the song might lead. The morning light stretched across the palace courtyard, catching the dew on the vines that now wove themselves around every column and archway. From the farthest tower, a messenger arrived on a wind-carved glider, its sails emblazoned with the sigil of the guardians, a single seed cradled by a rose. He dismounted with a breathless grin, his eyes alight with urgency. "The western cliffs have awakened," he announced, handing Eleanor a sealed vellum. A chorus of voices, unlike any we have heard, rose from the sea caves of Ardentia. The old stone guardians there have begun to sing, but their tone is fractured, as if something pulls at their strings. Eleanor broke the seal, unfurling a map inked in amber. The western cliffs rose like jagged teeth against the horizon, their faces scarred by centuries of storm and silence. She traced a line with her fingertip, the path of the next guardian's journey, and felt the hum thrum louder in her chest. "Leora," she said, turning to the healer who now stood beside her, "you have already shown what a single seed can do. The western cliffs will need more than water. They need the song to be whole again." Leora nodded, her satchel already half filled with seedlings of a new variety, vines whose blossoms glowed a deeper violet, resonating with the lower frequencies of the ancient hum. She slipped a small, polished stone into her pocket, a token from Murrej that pulsed faintly whenever the hum grew strong. "Then we go," she replied, her voice steady. We will climb the cliffs, find the stone guardians, and teach them the melody that binds us. The council gathered in the great hall, the vaulted ceiling alive with the soft glow of the luminous vines. Scholars and musicians tuned their instruments, preparing a chorus that would travel with Leora and the new guardians. Among them was a quiet young man named Thane, a cartographer whose maps were said to capture not only geography but the flow of hope itself. He offered his knowledge of the treacherous passes that wound through the cliffs, promising routes that avoided the most perilous ledges. With provisions packed and hearts aligned, the party set out at dusk, the kingdom's lights dimming behind them like a fading ember. The journey to the western cliffs took them across rolling plains where the vines stretched like golden rivers, through forests where the trees whispered the same hum in rustling leaves, and over a bridge of woven light that spanned a chasm deeper than any they had known. When they finally reached the foot of the cliffs, the sea roared against the stone, sending spray up in towering arches. The caves yawned like mouths waiting to be fed. Inside, the ancient stone guardians, towering statues of forgotten deities, stood in solemn rows, their eyes hollow, their stone throats mute. The air was thick with a discordant resonance, a song half remembered, trembling on the edge of collapse. Leora stepped forward, planting a seed at the base of the first statue. She sang the ancient melody, her voice weaving through the cavern, threading the notes into the stone's cracks. As the seed took root, a faint violet light seeped from the soil, spreading up the statue's legs, filling the hollows with a warm glow. The stone guardian's mouth opened, and a deep, resonant tone emerged, joining the hum that already pulsed through the kingdom. One by one, the other guardians awakened. Each seed Leora placed sparked a new chord, and with every chord the cavern filled with a richer, fuller harmony. Thane traced the patterns of the vibrations on his parchment, noting how the song shifted, how the vines responded, how the sea's own rhythm seemed to align with theirs. Outside the caves, the vines that clung to the cliff faces began to blossom, their blossoms shedding amber pollen that drifted on the wind, carrying the renewed song to distant villages. In the valleys below, farmers felt the hum in their fields, and crops grew taller, their leaves shimmering with the same violet hue that now lit the western cliffs. Elinor watched the distant lights from her balcony, the crown of thorns resting lightly against her chest. She felt the pulse of the ancient guardians echoing through her own veins, a reminder that the seed's promise was a living thing, ever expanding, ever requiring care. The ripple on the sea had become a tide, and the tide was now turning toward places once thought lost to darkness. As night fell, the cavern glowed like a constellation of stone and light. Leora, exhausted but exhilarated, rested her hand on the largest guardian, a towering figure whose eyes now shone with twin flames of amber and violet. The guardian's voice, deep as the ocean's abyss, spoke without words, a communion of feeling that filled the hearts of all present. In that moment, the kingdom understood that the journey was not a line but a circle, each seed planting another, each song birthing a new verse. The guardians of the seed would travel forever, their footsteps tracing the edges of the world, their songs weaving the fabric of hope that bound every shore, every cliff, every heart. The first light of dawn brushed the cliffs in rose gold, and the trio slipped from the cavern's glow into the world beyond, each step echoing the low hum that still lingered in their bones. The seedling at the base of the great guardian pulsed faintly, a living compass that guided them toward the next pulse of the ancient song, a rhythm that rose from the east, where the sun's fire met the sand. They crossed the rolling plains that had once been a tapestry of violet-tinged vines, now interwoven with new shoots that sprouted wherever the amber pollen had settled. The grasses whispered their gratitude, bending low as the travelers passed, and the wind carried a faint chorus of the guardian's tones, weaving through the reeds like a promise. Thane's parchment filled with fresh symbols, each a translation of the shifting melody, while Leora sang softly, her voice a thread that bound the notes to the earth beneath their feet. At the edge of the desert, the sand stretched like a sea of glass, its dunes shimmering with a subtle violet sheen, where the seed's influence had seeped into the very grains. The heat rose in wavering columns, but the air was alive with a low, resonant vibration that seemed to rise from the dunes themselves. Elinor lifted the crown of thorns, its thorns now glowing with a gentle amber light, and placed it upon the sand. Instantly, a line of crystalline pillars erupted from the ground, each one a conduit for the song, channeling the ancient harmony into the desert's heart. Following the pillars, they reached an oasis hidden beneath a canopy of palms whose leaves glowed with the same violet hue that had awakened the cliffs. In the center of the water lay a stone basin, smooth and dark, etched with runes that matched the patterns Thane had been recording. Leora knelt, pressed the seedling into the basin, and sang a new verse, one that rose like a tide, swelling and receding in perfect cadence with the desert wind. The water shimmered, and from its depths rose a figure of liquid crystal, its form shifting between wave and stone. The crystal guardian spoke without sound, its presence a cascade of feeling that washed over the three travelers. Images flooded their minds. A city of glass perched on a cliff far to the north, a forest where trees sang in unison, a mountain whose peaks were crowned with living constellations. The Guardian's message was clear. Each seed they planted would awaken a new guardian, and each guardian would point the way to the next place where the world's song needed to be healed. With renewed purpose, they set their sights on the glass city, its spires rumored to have been built from the tears of the moon. The journey took them through a valley where the vines had grown into arches, forming natural cathedrals that resonated with the lingering melody. Night fell, and the stars above seemed to pulse in time with the Guardian's song, each flicker a reminder that the world itself was a living instrument. When they finally arrived at the city, they found its streets silent, the glass facades dulled by a lingering darkness that had seeped in during centuries of neglect. At the heart of the city stood a towering obelisk of clear crystal, its surface cracked and mute. Leora placed the seedling at its base, and Elinor pressed the crown of thorns against the stone, the amber light seeping into the fissures. Thane began to trace the vibrations that rose from the obelisk, his quill moving faster than ever before, capturing a harmony that seemed to bridge the gap between sky and earth. As Leora sang, the crystal began to hum, first a low tremor, then a rising chord that filled the city's avenues. The cracks widened, not in destruction but in invitation, and from within the stone poured a cascade of violet light that bathed every building, restoring the glass to its original brilliance. The city awoke with a chorus of chimes, each window singing its own note, and the inhabitants emerged, eyes wide with wonder as the ancient song returned to their lives. The Guardians' network expanded, each new seed a node in a web that stretched across continents. Leora, Thane, and Elinor moved onward, their footsteps leaving trails of violet pollen that sparked new growth wherever they went. The world, once fragmented by silence, now thrummed with a unified melody, a living tapestry of hope that bound every shore, every cliff, every heart, and promised that the circle would never cease. The woman lifted the lyre, and as her fingers brushed the strings, a ripple of sound unfurled across the salt flats, turning the glittering surface into a sea of liquid light. Each vibration coaxed the violet pollen into spirals that rose like miniature auroras, weaving themselves into a tapestry that stretched toward the horizon. Leora felt the melody settle into her bones, a resonance that matched the rhythm of her own heart. Elinor's eyes widened as the amber glow of the crown of thorns pulsed in time with the lyre, and thrice, Thane found his quill trembling, eager to capture the new cadence that seemed to rewrite the very language of the wind. "Listen," the woman whispered, and the lyre sang a phrase that was both ancient and unborn. It spoke of a place where the sky itself was a harp, its strings formed by the constellations that hung over the world's highest peaks. Beyond the dunes, beyond the glass, there lies the summit of echoes, where the living constellations await the next seed. Their song will bind the final chord of the world's harmony. With a graceful motion, she placed a single seed, smaller than a grain of sand, its surface etched with the same violet sigils that had guided them thus far, into Leora's palm. The seed thrummed, warm as a heartbeat, and a faint glow seeped into the violet pollen that clung to their boots. As they turned to leave, the lyre's strings sang one last, lingering note that lingered in the air like a promise. The trio set out across the salt, the ground now humming beneath their steps. The wind carried the lyre's echo, guiding them toward the east where the sun rose over a range of jagged peaks that seemed to pierce the heavens. As they approached, the mountains revealed themselves not as cold stone but as living entities, crystalline spires that pulsed with starlight, each facet reflecting constellations that shifted with the night's passage. Between the peaks rose a narrow ridge, its surface covered in a carpet of soft moss that glowed with the same violet hue they had come to recognize as the world's lifeblood. At the ridge's summit stood a circle of ancient monoliths, each carved with runes that mirrored the patterns Thane had recorded in his journals. In the center, a basin of clear water mirrored the night sky, its surface rippling with the faint outline of a constellation that had never been seen by mortal eyes. Leora knelt, placing the new seed into the basin, and began to sing a verse that blended the lyre's melody with the chimes of the glass city and the whispers of the crystal guardian. The water responded, swirling upward to form a vortex of light that coalesced into a figure of pure starlight. Its form was both solid and ethereal, a guardian whose eyes held the depth of the cosmos. The guardian's voice resonated not in sound but in feeling, a cascade of awe that washed over the travelers. Images flooded their minds, a tapestry of all the places they had healed, each thread now glowing brighter, converging toward this summit. The guardian showed them a final vision, a hidden valley where the world's song began, a cradle of creation where the first note was born from the breath of the earth itself. The circle is near completion, the starlight guardian intoned. One more seed must be placed at the source, where the first chord was struck. Only then will the world's melody become unbroken, a perpetual symphony that can never be silenced. Elinor felt the crown of thorns pulse with renewed vigor, its amber light intertwining with the violet pollen, forming a bridge of luminescence that stretched toward the horizon. Thane's quill hovered over his parchment, the ink shimmering as it prepared to record the final verses of the song. Leora's voice rose, steady and clear, weaving the new melody into the fabric of the world. As the guardian's form dissolved into a cascade of starlight, the monoliths around them began to hum, each note aligning with the others, creating a resonance that vibrated through the very bones of the mountains. The violet pollen lifted from their boots, swirling upward in a vortex that rose higher than the peaks themselves, forming a luminous column that pointed directly toward the hidden valley beyond the summit. Without hesitation, the three travelers followed the luminous column, their steps guided by the harmonious pulse that now echoed in every breath they took. The journey ahead promised unknown challenges, but the world's song surged within them, a living current that would carry them to the source of all music, where the final seed awaited its awakening. Elinor lifted the crown of thorns, its amber glow now a steady river of light that merged with the violet pollen swirling around her hands. With a reverent breath, she extended the crown toward the keeper's outstretched palm, allowing the two sources of luminescence to intertwine. The seed, cradled in the keeper's palm, quivered as if feeling the pulse of a heart that had waited eons to beat again. Leora's lyre sang a single, pure note that rose above the rustle of the silver grass. The sound resonated through the roots of the echo tree, traveling along veins of crystal that ran like rivers beneath the soil. Thane, quill, still poised above the parchment, dipped itself into the ink and traced a line that glowed gold, sealing the moment in ink as much as in memory. When the seed touched the ground at the base of the echo tree, the soil itself seemed to inhale. A soft, resonant hum erupted from the earth, and the seed cracked open, releasing a cascade of light that poured into the tree's trunk. The tree's bark flared with a spectrum of colors, emerald, sapphire, ruby, each hue singing its own chord. The branches swayed, though no wind moved, and from their tips fell droplets of pure sound, each droplet a note that hung in the air before dissolving into the valley's breath. The keeper's form brightened, her silver hair rippling like a waterfall of starlight. "The final chord has been struck," she whispered, though her voice was felt more than heard. "The world's melody is whole once more, but its harmony must be guarded." From the depths of the valley, a low rumble rose, and the mountains that had once been silent sent down a river of crystal water that flowed toward the echo tree. The water merged with the luminous droplets, forming a shimmering torrent that spiraled upward, wrapping the tree in a veil of liquid light. As the veil tightened, the valley itself began to pulse, each pulse a beat that echoed across the continents. Thane felt his parchment tremble, and the ink rearranged itself into a new stanza, a prophecy that had never been written before. "When the seed of silence blooms in light, the world shall sing through endless night. Guardians rise where shadows fall, and harmony shall bind us all." Eleanor's eyes widened as the crown of thorns lifted from her brow, hovering in the air like a small sun. The amber light expanded, forming a protective sphere around the valley. Within that sphere, time seemed to slow. The violet pollen settled like snow, each particle a living memory of every song ever sung. Leora lowered her lyre, and the final chord resonated through her strings, binding the seed's energy to the world's lifeblood. The sound traveled along the luminous column that had guided them, racing back across the jagged peaks, through the crystal spires, and into the farthest corners of the realm. Villages that had known silence felt a gentle hum return to their hearths. Rivers that had run mute began to babble in rhythm with the newfound symphony. The keeper turned to the three travelers, her eyes reflecting the entire cosmos. "Your journey does not end here," she said. "The song is perpetual, but it requires keepers to tend its verses. You have become part of its chorus." A soft wind lifted the violet pollen once more, swirling around Eleanor, Thane, and Leora, binding them together in a luminous braid. Their hearts beat in unison with the world's song, and as the braid tightened, they felt a new purpose settle within them, a promise to wander, to heal, and to ensure that no silence ever again could threaten the harmony they had restored. With the valley bathed in radiant light and the echo tree humming its eternal refrain, the three travelers stepped forward, their silhouettes merging with the melody that now wove through every stone, leaf, and star. The world sang, and they were its voice. The village square opened before them like a living stanza, each cobblestone humming faintly underfoot. Children chased ribbons of light that drifted from the lanterns, their laughter weaving itself into the ambient melody. An elderly baker, his flour-dusted hands moving with a rhythm that matched the pulse of the valley, paused to stare at the trio, eyes widening as if recognizing a long-forgotten refrain. Eleanor stepped forward, her fingertips brushing the crown of thorns that still hovered like a halo. The amber glow pulsed in response, casting a warm wash over the villagers. "We come bearing the song," she said, her voice resonating not just in the air but in the very marrow of those who listened. The world has been silenced, but the harmony has returned. We are its keepers now. A murmur rippled through the crowd, and from the far end of the square a figure emerged. A young woman draped in a cloak of woven reeds, her eyes reflecting the violet pollen that still lingered in the breeze. She introduced herself as Meles, the village's own keeper of stories, tasked with preserving the oral histories that had survived the age of silence. "We have felt the change," she whispered, "but there is a tremor beneath the song, a discord that lingers in the western hills." Leora tightened her grip on the lyre, feeling the instrument thrumming with the same unease. "What kind of discord?" she asked, her tone both curious and cautious. Meles gestured toward the horizon, where the silhouette of the western hills was shrouded in a thin veil of mist. "A darkness has begun to gather there, a silence that feeds on the very notes we have just restored. It is not a void, but a hollow, an absence that seeks to swallow the melody. The elders speak of a forgotten chord, one that was never meant to be heard, locked away in the cavern of echoes. If it awakens, it could unravel the harmony we have fought so hard to reclaim." Thane unfurled a fresh sheet of parchment, the ink already forming a quick sketch of the hills and the rumored cavern. He traced a line with his quill, knotting the ancient runes that marked the entrance to the cavern, runes that matched symbols he had seen etched on the echo tree's bark during their ascent. "The cavern lies beneath the old stone arch at the foot of the highest peak," he wrote, "and the forgotten chord is said to be bound by a resonance that only those who have heard the world's true song can unlock." Elinor felt the crown's light intensify, as if acknowledging the gravity of the task. "Then we must go," she declared, her resolve steady. "If the silence returns, it will not only threaten this valley but every corner that has begun to sing again." The villagers gathered supplies, bundles of dried herbs, woven blankets and flutes carved from the heartwood of ancient trees. As night fell, the sky blossomed with constellations that seemed to pulse in time with the valley's heartbeat. The trio, now joined by Meles and a small band of volunteers, set out toward the western hills, their path illuminated by the lingering violet pollen that fell like gentle snow. The journey was quiet, each step measured against the rhythm of the land. The mist grew thicker as they approached the foot of the highest peak, curling around their ankles like a soft, damp veil. When they reached the stone arch, its surface was etched with the same luminous symbols that had guided them to the echo tree. Leora raised her lyre, and a single, pure note rang out, resonating with the carvings and causing the stone to glow faintly. A hidden doorway yawned open, revealing a stairwell that spiraled down into the earth. The air that rose from the depths carried a faint, low hum, an echo of something ancient and unsettled. As they descended, the walls began to pulse with faint light, each beat matching the cadence of their own hearts. At the cavern's heart, a massive crystal formation rose like a frozen harp, its strings stretched taut across the void. The crystal sang a mournful tone, a chord that seemed to pull at the very fibers of their being. Meles stepped forward, her voice steady as she recited an old verse, passed down through generations. From silence born the hidden note, in darkness kept the world's own throat. Awake, O chord, and bind the night. Restore the song, restore the light. As the words left her lips, the crystal's tone shifted, harmonizing with the verse. The forgotten chord, long dormant, began to vibrate, releasing a wave of sound that rippled outward, filling the cavern with a resonance that felt both foreign and familiar. The braid that bound Eleanor, Thane, and Leora glowed brighter, their connection amplifying the chord's power. Suddenly, the cavern trembled. From the shadows emerged a shape, an embodiment of the silence they had feared, a formless wraith of muted air that swirled like a vortex of blackened mist. It reached toward the crystal, seeking to smother its song. Leora struck a rapid arpeggio, the notes slicing through the gloom, while Eleanor's crown projected shafts of amber light that pierced the darkness. Thane, his parchment now alive with shifting symbols, traced a sigil of resonance that anchored the crystal's vibration, preventing the wraith from draining its energy. The battle of sound and silence raged, each note a blade, each hush a shield. With a final, resonant chord that blended the ancient verse, the lyre's strings, the crown's light, and the parchment's sigil, the wraith shattered into a cascade of silent particles that dissolved into the stone. The crystal's song swelled, filling the cavern with a pure, unbroken melody that resonated through the earth and rose back up the mountain, joining the valley's chorus. When the echo faded, the cavern was still, but the air thrummed with a new harmony, a promise that even the deepest silence could be transformed by those who dared to listen. The trio emerged from the arch, the sunrise painting the western hills in gold. The villagers they had left behind greeted them with cheers, their faces alight with hope. Meles placed a small, hand-carved flute in Eleanor's hand, a token of the village's gratitude, and a reminder that the song was now a tapestry woven by many. "We will keep the verses alive," she said, "and together we will guard the melody against any darkness that dares to return." With the forgotten chord now bound and the western hills resonating with renewed life, Eleanor, Thane, Leora, and their new allies set their sights on the next horizon. The world's song stretched endlessly before them, each verse a path, each chorus a promise. And as they walked, the braid of light that linked their hearts pulsed in time with the everlasting symphony, guiding them toward the next stanza of their endless journey. The road ahead wound through a forest where the trees seemed to hum with their own low chord, leaves rustling in a rhythm that matched the pulse of the braid. As they entered the canopy, the light filtered through in thin ribbons, each one catching the glow of the intertwined strands and scattering it like tiny prisms. Leora's lyre slipped from her shoulder and rested against a moss-covered trunk, its strings resonating with the forest's murmur, while Thane consulted his parchment, the ink now shifting to depict a map of unseen currents beneath the earth. Kaida moved ahead, her steps barely disturbing the fallen needles. She lifted a hand, and the air around her shimmered, revealing faint threads of silver that stretched from the roots of the ancient oaks to the distant hills. "These are the hidden pathways," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the wind. "The world's song is not only heard, it is felt in the veins of the land. Follow these threads, and we will reach the Etherian Sea without losing the melody we carry." Elinor felt the braid tighten around her wrist, a gentle reminder of the responsibility she now bore. The crown's amber light pulsed in sync with the forest's rhythm, casting warm circles on the path. She lifted the hand-carved flute, its wood still warm from Maylies's touch, and played a soft, wandering tune. The notes rose, weaving through the trees, coaxing a flock of silver-feathered birds to take flight. Their wings beat in time with the music, creating a cascade of echoing chirps that added a bright counterpoint to the deeper hum of the woods. Soon the path opened onto a high plateau, overlooking a vast expanse of water that stretched to the horizon, its surface catching the sun in 1,000 glittering notes. The Etherian Sea lay before them, its waves rolling in a perpetual lullaby that rose and fell like a breathing organism. In the distance, a cluster of islands rose like the keys of a massive, forgotten piano, each peak crowned with white stone that glowed faintly in the late afternoon light. Kaida placed a palm on the braid, feeling its vibration swell. Beyond those islands lies the echoing reef, where the ocean itself sings. Legends say the reef holds a fragment of the prime note, the source of all harmony. If we can retrieve it, the world's song will be stronger than any silence that may come. Her eyes glimmered with a mixture of excitement and solemn purpose. Thane unfurled his parchment, the symbols now forming a diagram of currents and tides. "The sea is not a simple road," he said, tracing a line that pulsed with a soft blue glow. "We must ride the wind's breath and the water's rhythm together. The flute you carry, Elinor, can summon a breeze that will guide us, while Leora's lyre can calm the waves when they grow too fierce." Leora tightened the strap of her lyre and nodded. "Then let us set our course." She raised her instrument, striking a single, resonant chord that seemed to ripple across the water, coaxing a gentle swell toward the shore. The sea responded, forming a smooth, rolling path of foam that glimmered like liquid crystal. Elinor lifted the flute to her lips, inhaling the salty air, and blew a breath that carried a bright, airy melody. The notes rose, catching the wind and shaping it into a steady gust that pushed the group forward. The braid of light stretched across the water's surface, a luminous bridge that guided their steps as they walked upon the sea as if it were solid ground. Halfway across the shimmering path, a low, mournful tone rose from the depths, a warning, perhaps, or a lament. From the water emerged a massive creature, its body composed of intertwining kelp and shells, eyes like polished moonstones. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, each motion sending ripples of sound through the water. Kaida stepped forward, her hand outstretched, and sang a wordless hymn that resonated with the creature's own song. The kelp beast paused, its eyes softening, and then lowered its massive head, allowing the travelers to pass. In its wake, a trail of phosphorescent pearls drifted to the surface, each one humming with a faint, pure tone. Leora gathered the pearls, placing them gently into a woven pouch. "These are the echoes of the reef," she said, her voice reverent. "They carry the memory of the sea's original chord. When we reach the island of the prime note, they will help us unlock its power." The group continued, the braid of light pulsing brighter with each step, the pearls hum blending with the sea's lullaby. As the sun dipped low, casting the world in amber and violet, the silhouette of the island chain grew nearer, its peaks outlined against the twilight sky. The promise of the prime note beckoned, and with it the knowledge that their journey was far from over, each new stanza of the world's song waiting to be discovered, each challenge a chance to weave their own melody into the endless symphony. Elinor lifted the flute once more, feeling the cool night air settle against her skin. She closed her eyes, letting the memory of the braids hum and the kelp beast sigh fill her mind. When she opened them, the moon hung low, a silver disk reflected in the gentle tide, and she began to play. The first note was a soft, trembling whisper, like a droplet falling onto a still pond. It rose and fell, weaving through the night breeze, and the sand beneath their feet seemed to pulse in time. Leora answered with a low, resonant chord from her lyre, the sound deep as the ocean's trench, grounding the melody. Kaida's voice joined, a warm, humming hum that rose like steam from a hidden spring, while Thane tapped a rhythm on the parchment, his fingers tracing the currents as if they were drum beats. As the quartet of sound swelled, the island itself responded. From the cliffs, ancient stones began to glow faintly, veins of pale light tracing the contours of the rock. The ground trembled gently, and a low, resonant tone emanated from the heart of the island, as if the land were a massive, sleeping instrument waiting to be awakened. Arya stepped forward, her hands raised, and the moonlight seemed to gather around her fingertips. She whispered words in a language older than any song the travelers had heard, and the glowing veins spread outward, forming a luminous pattern that traced a spiral across the island's surface. The pattern converged on a cavern mouth, hidden behind a curtain of cascading vines. "The prime note lies within," Arya said, her voice now a harmonious blend of wind and water. "But the cavern will only open to a melody that balances all four elements: air, water, earth, and fire. You have begun the harmony, now you must complete it." Elinor inhaled deeply, feeling the breath of the sea fill her lungs. She altered her tune, adding a bright, flickering trill that rose like a spark catching dry tinder. Leora deepened her chord, letting it resonate with the earth's low hum, while Kaida sang a flowing, liquid phrase that mirrored the tide's rise and fall. Thane, ever the scholar, tapped a steady, rhythmic beat that mimicked the steady pulse of a hearth fire. The combined music surged forward, a cascade of sound that wrapped around the cavern entrance. The vines shivered, parting like curtains drawn back by an unseen hand. A warm glow spilled from within, revealing a vast chamber carved from crystal and stone. In the center stood a pedestal of polished obsidian, upon which rested a single, luminous crystal that pulsed with a soft, golden light, the prime note itself. The crystal emitted a tone that resonated deep within each of them, a note that seemed to echo the very core of their being. As they approached, the pearls from the echoing reef floated from Leora's pouch, hovering around the crystal like a constellation of tiny stars. Their faint hum merged with the crystal's tone, creating a chord that filled the cavern with a radiant sound wave. Arya stepped beside the pedestal, her eyes reflecting the crystal's glow. "Now place the echoes within the prime note," she instructed. Leora gently laid the woven pouch on the crystal's surface. The pearls rolled onto the stone, each one finding its place as if guided by an invisible hand. As the last pearl settled, the crystal flared brighter, and a wave of pure, harmonious sound rippled outward, shaking the cavern walls and spilling out across the island. The island's glow intensified, bathing the beach in a golden luminescence. The braid of light that had guided them across the sea brightened, now a radiant bridge of pure sound that stretched from the island to the distant horizon. The world seemed to hold its breath, the silence that once threatened now replaced by a symphony of life. Elinor lowered her flute, her cheeks flushed with the effort and exhilaration of the performance. Leora rested her lyre against the pedestal, her fingers still tingling from the resonance. Kaida closed her eyes, feeling the lingering echo of the island's song flow through her veins. Thane examined the parchment, noting that the diagram of currents now glowed with a faint blue hue, indicating a new path opened by the prime note's activation. Arya turned to them, her smile serene. "The prime note is now attuned to your hearts. Its power will amplify the harmony you bring to the world, but it also calls for vigilance. Darkness seeks to silence the song, and the balance must be kept." She gestured toward the sea, where the braid of light now pulsed like a living artery. "Your journey continues. Follow the melody, and let it guide you to the places where silence still lingers." With renewed purpose, the companions stepped onto the luminous bridge, feeling the music beneath their feet. The sea beneath them sang a new verse, one that carried their names and their resolve. As they walked toward the horizon, the island faded behind them, its song now woven into the fabric of the world, waiting for the next stanza they would compose.